Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this Thursday, August 24th, 2017. My name is Frank Buquicchio, and I'm a partner at Russo Law Group, and I'll be presenting tonight's webinar, which is entitled, as you can see there, How to Avoid a Medicaid Denial. Also joining me tonight is Gideon Shine. Hey, Gideon, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Frank?
I'm great, thank you, and I really appreciate you taking the time, especially out of your personal time, to help us out tonight. Gideon is a certified professional daily money manager. It's a mouthful for me, and he's a partner at Eddie and Shine. And tonight he'll be discussing why it's so important, to build a good elder law and elder care. I'm so used to saying elder law, Gideon, an elder care team. Gideon is not on the elder law side of things. So before I begin, though, I need to address a few administrative items. The presentation will last about an hour, and during that time, hopefully you'll have some questions. You can type your questions in the question pod, which is located in the lower right-hand corner or thereabouts of your screen. So you can do that at any point during the presentation tonight. We'll try to address the questions as we go along, but also leave some time at the end of the program for some Q&A for either Gideon or me. No question is unimportant, so we ask that you ask away, and we'll answer as many questions as time permits. Please note, though, that we'll be discussing financial and legal matters, and this program is not a substitute for obtaining professional financial and legal counsel. And also, at the end of the presentation, you're going to see my contact information as well as Gideon, so please contact either of us respectively for any questions you have regarding the material tonight or anything else you think we might be able to help you with. And last but not least, you're going to see a survey at the end of the presentation. Please take a second or so, a couple minutes maybe, to answer the survey questions. We appreciate the feedback, and it helps us develop and improve future webinars. All right, so got all that paperwork out of the way. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll get started. So hopefully everyone can see my screen there. So just a little overview of what what I'll be talking about tonight. I'll be talking about Medicaid planning, what that means. I'll talk about a little bit about some long-term care facts. We're going to talk about the top 7 mistakes I think that people make or may make when it comes to Medicaid applications specifically, which is one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. And then, of course, we have Gideon as our spotlight speaker, so Gideon will have some time to talk about how he can help people. And then, as I said, we'll have some Q&A after all of that. So first, what is Medicaid planning? Let's talk about Medicaid eligibility and what that means. I think Medicaid planning to me is really asset protection planning. It's about protecting yourself and your dignity in the event you suffer a long-term or catastrophic illness that requires long-term care. We'll talk about some of the costs involved when it comes to long-term care. So this is a study that was done a few years back, and I've always heard this even before this study came out, that the average nursing home stay was about 3 years, 2 years and 4 months, whatever you want to say. But this adds up. Most nursing homes in this area, Long Island, are running probably around $15,000, $16,000 a month on average. So there are some that are actually more expensive than that if you're privately paying. So do the math. It's close to 200 grand a year. And I would say that most people either couldn't afford that or wouldn't be able to afford that for very long, and then would be wiped out. So I think Medicaid planning is about, planning in advance, trying to protect those assets in case of a long-term illness. So I've got this slide here that I don't know, I just think it's kind of cute. So there's a doctor there with a patient, and it says, I'll have someone come in and prep you for the bill. Because long-term care costs are exorbitant. As I said, nursing homes can be $130,000 to $190,000 or more a year. Home health care can run $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, sometimes more if your level of care is there where you need more help. So how does this all get paid for? Is insurance going to cover long-term care? And the answer is, from a Medicare standpoint, not really. Medicare was not meant to be a long-term care payer. Medicare is meant to pay for short-term care, so obviously hospitalization, anybody who's had the experience either personally or with a family member or a loved one who has had maybe a hospital stay and then had some rehabilitation in a nursing facility, and that was covered in part or in whole by Medicare. Medicare covers the first 20 days of rehabilitation at 100%, and then there's up to another 100 days of coverage with a copay that's sometimes covered by supplemental insurance. But Medicare, as I said, is not for long-term care. Long-term care insurance is great for those people who are insurable and can afford it, because it can be costly. So that, that sometimes can scare people away, or if they may not just be insurable if they already have health issues. But long-term care insurance is helpful in the right situation for certain people, and that can pay for long-term care. But again, long-term care insurance generally, unless you have a lifetime policy, which most people wouldn't when they have long-term care insurance, it's only going to cover you for some amount of time. You can pay out of pocket, excuse me, of course, that's your assets and your savings. So you could pay for your care until you basically run out of money, and then ask the government to pay, which would be Medicaid, and we'll get into some of that on the next slide, I think. You can have other family members or children pay. This one's, I guess it's a viable option, but I usually laugh because, good luck trying to get for your kids to pay for your care, especially when it's so expensive. But there are situations where that happens. I have a client who has a son who's a very, very successful doctor, and obviously he does very well for himself. And he actually, he didn't actually pay for the care, but what he did was he went out and got the parents' long-term care insurance and paid for the long-term care insurance to help them protect their assets. So I guess it's possible. And of course, as I said, the government, which is the Medicaid program, which is really kind of our focus for tonight. But Medicaid has very strict eligibility rules. Medicaid is for people of limited means. And what does that mean? It's a poverty program. It's a program that was started back in 1965, and it was meant for people who have very limited assets and income. So in 2017, limited assets means $14,850. So you can't have, with a few exceptions, you can't have more than $14,850 to your name and be eligible for Medicaid. A couple of the exceptions are listed here. So your home is exempt as long as you live in it, although there is currently, actually going back a few years now, there's a dollar amount value, which for 2017 I think is $840,000. So if your equity needs to be less than $840,000. You can prepay your funeral. It has to be irrevocable, which means obviously you can't get the money back. Certainly not after you die, of course, but if you wanted it beforehand. Your car is exempt, your personal belongings, and a small amount of life insurance. Small amount meaning face value of $1,500 or less. So those are exempt assets. And then you have $14,000. So if you have more than $14,000 of liquid assets, and the only other caveat here would be IRAs or retirement accounts, which is for another day, you've got to get under $14,000 for Medicaid eligibility. That's what Medicaid allows you to keep. So it's a very restrictive program, and because it has very strict eligibility rules, I find often that people have trouble with the Medicaid application process, sometimes with the planning, and certainly getting Medicaid approved. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about this evening. Just a reminder, let me just check to see if anybody has in the question. You can type questions in the question box, and nothing yet, so we'll keep going. But you feel free to type in questions as we go. As I said, I'll check in periodically on those to see if we can get to answering them during the presentation. So, what are the top mistakes that people make that we see when it comes to Medicaid eligibility, Medicaid applications, and maybe even some from a planning standpoint? We're going to talk about some of those as well. So one of these are not, it says number 7, but this is not necessarily in descending order. One of them is applying for Medicaid too early or too late. This is really important because, especially if a person is in a nursing home, how could you file too early? Well, if you file a Medicaid application and it's not complete, which means that you don't have everything in the application that Medicaid is going to need to make a decision, hopefully a positive decision, of course, what's going to happen is Medicaid is going to send you a request for information, a document request, and in Nassau and Suffolk anyway, you're going to have 10 days typically to get what's on that list. It could be one thing or it could be 3 pages of things that they're looking for, and you're going to have 10 days, 10 calendar days, not 10 business days, which means that if you need something from a bank account, let's say you have a bank account and Medicaid wants information from a statement or a copy of a check or proof of a deposit ticket, and you need to get that to the bank and get them to get that for you. Obviously, unless the bank is open on weekends, which not all banks are, you lose a couple of days. So the point of that is that if you don't get all of that information within those 10 days, you're going to run a very high risk of getting denied. Now you can ask for more time, and you will likely get another 10 days if you're still working on it, and you can prove you're working on it. But again, then after those second 10 days, you run the risk of being denied. So generally, we like to, when we're working on Medicaid applications, we like to take as much time as we need up to a certain amount, which leads me to filing too late. So Medicaid currently can pay and will pay, provided the person was eligible, up to 3 months back from the date that you apply for Medicaid benefits. This is really important with nursing home applications, because if you need Medicaid, let's say as of June 1st in the nursing home, you're running a bill basically, right? The person is in the nursing home, you're applying for Medicaid, so June, July, August, you have until September to actually file the application. And if you file the application by September, actually you can file it in the month of September. So if you file the application in September and get approved because the person was eligible as of June, Medicaid will pay retroactively up to June. But I've had clients sometimes who have come in because they didn't know, or they were misled, or they misunderstood. And let's say the parent or the spouse needed Medicaid as of June, and they're coming in to see me in September, October, November. And now if it's October, for example, even if we filed the application quickly in October, we still can't get that retroactive coverage back to June. So it's very important to know when you need Medicaid eligibility. It's called the pickup date, so that you're not filing too late. And again, if you have the time, because sometimes we do have to rush. If we need a June pickup date, I have a client who comes to me in September for whatever reason, we have to get that application in September. So we may file an application that's not complete, or is not as complete as we like, because we didn't have enough time to gather the information. But we'll keep working on it, of course, with the family and with Medicaid, hopefully working with us. All right. So timing of the filing is critical. Another huge problem, and this is where I always say I would be a terrible, God forbid I need to go into a nursing home. My wife is going to have a heck of a time applying for Medicaid for me, because my record keeping is not great, because most of the things are on the computer, and there's very little paper. And but this is very important. It's important. The Medicaid application is an audit, and this is most of what I'm talking about tonight is directed towards nursing home Medicaid. The community Medicaid application, because there are no transfer of assets penalties that you have with nursing home Medicaid, is less onerous in terms of some of these issues. So most of what I'm talking about tonight is for nursing home Medicaid, and especially with this particular slide, because there's a 5-year look back. So 5 years worth of documentation. Think about that. What does that mean? That means copies of your tax returns for the last 5 years, copies of every statement of every account that your name, and if you're married, your spouse's name was on in the last 5 years, open or closed, every statement. You have to get proof of deposits for every account. You have to get proof of withdrawals or checks of at least $1,000 or more, and sometimes they want more than that if it's less than 1,000. It's an incredible amount of documentation. So not having those records, and sometimes you have to explain where money went. You wrote a check to somebody because you had something done, but you don't have the receipt. So keeping good records is critically important. And I would suggest, at least for the last 5 years, of paperwork, just in case you might need. Excuse me. Okay, next is taking advantage of some protections for the community spouse. So this is this is partly a denial issue and partly a planning issue. So there are certain allowances that Medicaid has in place. They're called spousal impoverishment, which allows the spouse, what I'll call the well spouse, to keep a certain amount of assets, a certain amount of income, monthly income, in their name and protect it. So if you don't take advantage of those, or for example, a spouse-to-spouse transfer of assets is exempt for Medicaid purposes. So it's possible for someone, because I've seen this happen, for a married client to come in and have, money in their spouse's name and think that, well, we didn't do anything 5 years ago, so I guess it's too late. So we're going to have to pay this money to the nursing home. And the answer there is no. You can transfer it from spouse to spouse, and it's an exempt transfer, and there's no penalty associated with that. So it's very important to take advantage of those transfer rules. Spousal refusal, of course, which is something somewhat unique to New York, because not all states have spousal refusal. It's what I usually say about spousal refusal is that it sounds harsh, but considering the alternative, most people get over that harshness pretty quickly, because the spousal refusal basically says, I refuse to use my money for my spouse's care. And it's basically because you're asking Medicaid to pay. So, it sounds kind of harsh that you're refusing to pay, but the alternative is paying. And when the alternative is paying, as I said before, $15,000, $16,000 a month, the spousal refusal pill is a little bit easier to swallow, I think. And then it's also very important for community spouses, this is the spouse who's not getting Medicaid or needing Medicaid or help, to do post-eligibility planning, especially when it's nursing home. Because if we have, so for example, we've got the couple there in the slide. Let's say the husband has to go into the nursing home. We take the assets and transfer them to his wife, which is exempt, and we get him on Medicaid. Now what happens if something happens to the wife if she needs care? She can't give it back to him because we already did that once. So it's important to do post-eligibility planning when there's a married couple involved. Whew. All right, we're cooking. Hope everybody's still with me. You know what? Let me check the question box again. Let's see. Hold on. Well, there's actually, looks like somebody started to type a question but didn't finish. So whoever if you can take a look, or maybe in the middle of typing it, that's fine. But it's just a couple of words there. Okay, so we'll continue. Excuse me. Let me take a sip of my water here. Okay. Another big problem when it comes to Medicaid denials and Medicaid planning, frankly, are transferring or giving away assets without a plan. So some people, will just think, well, I'll just give, my money or whatever I have to my kids, and I'm allowed to do that. The problem with that is that can be a terrible strategy both for you and the kids. What if something happens to the child? If you're giving I'll use the term money loosely. It could be a real estate. It could be money. Giving the money to the kids just to hold. What if something happens? What if something happens to the child? They have a marital problem. They have a creditor problem. God forbid they pass away. You could have tax implications, right? Because you have an IRA, for example. You can't just give that money to your kid. You have to pull the money out of your IRA and give it to the kid, and that creates taxes. Or annuities that might be tax deferred, or capital gains taxes if we're talking about a stock or a piece of property. So just giving assets to the family, to the kids, generally is a terrible idea. There are a few exceptions to that, but generally that's a terrible idea. From a planning standpoint, if you're looking to protect money, almost always setting up what we call a Medicaid asset protection trust is the way to go. It's more protective for you as the parent, or the person who has the money or the assets. It's actually more protective for your kids, or whoever you're trying to protect your money for. So having a plan, if you're looking to, what I'll say, divest, we can call it giving away, divest yourself of some of your assets. Having a plan is really important, because if you need nursing home care within 5 years, We got to make sure that we have a way to deal with that. And again, if you just give money to the kids to hold, and something happens or you can't get it back within those 5 years, it's just not a good idea. It's a recipe for disaster. Or kid gets sick. I mean, there's just so many things that could happen. Okay. All right. So another, this one's huge, I think, because as I said before, there are lots of times, I mean, countless times I could tell you in doing seminars and just meeting with families, there's this common misconception out there that, well, if we didn't do it more than 5 years ago, then there's nothing we can do. And that's wrong. First of all, not even related to this slide, but even if there aren't any exempt transfers, we can still protect a portion of those assets even in a crisis. But sometimes we can do better. There are times, there are certain transfers that Medicaid allows without jeopardizing eligibility. In other words, no penalty for transfer. So the general rule with Medicaid is, well, let me back up for a minute, because I think talking about the penalty and the concept of the penalty is important, because I think there's a misconception about this too. A lot of people think that Medicaid will come after you if you make transfers or gifts of your assets. And it's not Medicaid that does the pursuing, let's say. If you go into a nursing home and the Medicaid looks back 5 years, and during that 5 years, they see transfers of money going to your kids, for example, Medicaid will penalize you depending on the amount of money involved. The penalty is a period of time. It's not necessarily a dollar penalty. So, for example, in Nassau and Suffolk, every roughly $13,000 that you give away creates a 1 month penalty, which means that Medicaid won't pay for 1 month in the nursing home. So if you gave away $130,000, let's say over the course of the 5 years to your kids, for example, that equates to a 10-month penalty, right? 130,000 divided by 13,000 is 10. So what that means is Medicaid is not going to pay for the first 10 months. Now think about that. If Medicaid is not paying for 10 months, and we have somebody who's in a nursing home, and they don't have the money to pay, because if they did, they wouldn't have been applying for Medicaid, then who's not going to be happy? The nursing home. The nursing home is the one who's going to come after the kids or whoever it is, because they need to get paid, right? So that's the general rule. Two exceptions to that are spouses, which is what I already said, and the other is to certain family members. So one of those, we're going to break it down into a couple of those. One of them is if you have a child who's disabled, Medicaid will allow transfers to that child without penalty. All right. Now, that one you have to be careful, though, because depending on the nature of the child's disability, we could be talking about an adult child who's on Social Security disability. But if they're on something like SSI, for example, which is similar to Medicaid, that's actually more restrictive than Medicaid, there's very strict eligibility rules, then we don't want to give it to that child, generally speaking. We may want to put it into a trust for their benefit. But there are ways to do it, is my point. Just a quick example of this. Gideon and I were chatting before we got on tonight about how we both like to give stories, because I think real stories are good examples of things. I met with a woman, actually, a number of years ago. She had an only child, her son, and we had done some basic planning for her, some advance directives, power of attorney, help get proxy her will, and I think that was it. I think we had transferred her house actually to a trust as well. And then a number of years later, I met with the son again because his mom had taken a fall and she was in rehab and she wasn't going to be able to come home. And she had a bank account that was joint with her son, and it had about almost $90,000 in it. So his thought was, well, like most people, well, there's $90,000 there. First he said, well, is half of it protected because it's joint, me and mom? And I said, no. Joint accounts, that's not how Medicaid works. It's all exposed. So he said, well, I guess, it's too late. We can't do anything. So I went on to explain to him, as I said before, that even in a crisis, we can do something. And I went through this plan of how we'd be able to save about half of that money. And he frankly was thrilled because he came in thinking it was all gone. But anyhow, I explained to him what he needed to do with the bank, and he got up to say goodbye. And I didn't realize the way we were sitting at the conference room table, because we were sitting kind of corner to corner, he had a cane on the other side of him, and I asked him about the cane, and they said he had a bad hip, and I asked him if he was on disability, and he said yes, he is. So I said, sit down. There's a new plan. Instead of protecting about half of mom's money, we can protect all of mom's money, because you can go to the bank tomorrow, take all of that money out, put it into your name, and it's protected. So the point of that is that there are a lot of rules for Medicaid. There are also exceptions to the rules. And the good thing is you don't have to know all of it, because you know of us. So it's very important, and this is all, I'm going to talk a little bit about this later on too. It's very important, especially in a crisis situation, to seek an experienced, competent elder law attorney, because we deal with this stuff all the time. We know the rules, we know the exceptions, and we're always looking to fit people into these exceptions first, because we can do better in terms of protecting them and their assets, and save more, obviously, when we can fit into some of these exceptions. All right. So I don't have enough time to go into all the exceptions, but disabled child is one, spouse is another. And there's another one that I'll just mention that is called a caregiver child. So if you have a child who's lived with you for at least 2 years prior to your needing a nursing home, Medicaid will let you transfer your house only, no money, your house into that child's name without a wait. So again, that's, a bunch of rules, bunch of exceptions, and it's good to know somebody who knows them, I guess. All right, so second to last, what are we calling these mistakes, I guess, is failing to respond to Medicaid requests. So this is an absolute no-no. If you apply for Medicaid and Medicaid requests information or documentation, unless there's an overwhelming reason to not respond, I can't think of one off the top of my head, because you need to respond in some way. Even if the response is, I already gave it to you, here it is again, don't ignore the request, number one. And number two is, as I mentioned before, timing is critical. You have a certain amount of time to get them information. Make sure you get them that information, or at least a reason for not having it and requesting more time before that time is up. Because I find we don't get a lot of Medicaid denials, thankfully, but the ones that we do almost overwhelmingly are because we didn't get Medicaid something fast enough. All right, so it's very important to get things to them in a timely fashion. And again, which leads me to our number one slide. It's complicated, it's stressful. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. At least consult with a professional. I have sometimes had clients come in and say that they want us to do the Medicaid application. I've had clients come in and say that, well, for whatever reason, we're not going to do the Medicaid application, but we want to have you on board so that we can call if there are any questions or concerns about the way the process is going. So Medicaid, a lot of people get their counseling from a friend at the coffee shop, or someone who has a financial interest in some particular strategy, in terms of, maybe selling them a product. Don't do that. It's whatever money you think you're going to be saving by trying to handle this stuff on your own could actually cost you thousands of dollars later on. All right, so it's very important. You got to be aware of making these kinds of decisions when you're emotionally distraught. It's very important to seek professional, competent legal advice. All right, I don't know how much more strongly I can say that. All right, so I'm going to check again on the questions. Okay, we got a couple here. Hold on. Okay, so first question is, can you have annuities in the bank? Oh wait, hold on. All right. So, can you have annuities in the bank and still receive community Medicaid? Okay, I think that's the gist of it. It's a combination. Can you have annuities in the bank and still receive community Medicaid? So, the general rule with Medicaid, the number as I showed you before is $14,850. There are a few exceptions, whether it be an annuity or it could be a retirement type account, which may or may not be an annuity, so an IRA or 401k, which sometimes are annuities as well. So the general answer is yes, you can have annuities in the bank and still receive community Medicaid. However, with an annuity or a retirement account, you have to annuitize it, which means you have to make an irrevocable election to convert that annuity to what they refer to as an income stream. And then Medicaid will no longer look at it as an asset, but they will use it towards your income. And Medicaid has rules as to how much monthly income you're allowed to keep, and depending on your income, whether it's community Medicaid or nursing home, will determine what you do with it. In community Medicaid, if you're over the income allowance, you can do what's called a pooled income trust. Well, not you can join what's called a pooled income trust, and Medicaid lets you put your extra income into that trust. And I've done webinars on that before. Just so you know, I may mention this now. All of these webinars that I do this once a month. They all get recorded, and they all get put up onto our website. I've been doing this for a couple of years, so they're probably not all there because at some point they drop off, I think, in terms of numbers. But so, for example, this will be up on the website in a week or two or so, so that if somebody couldn't listen to it, they can listen to it again later or share it with a friend. So enough of me for now. I'm going to give my throat a chance to catch up, and I'm going to turn it over to Gideon. And you can see I love that picture of you, Gideon. It's great. You look very relaxed and happy. I love it. So tell us a little bit about you, if you would first, and then tell us about why it's so important to build a good elder care team.
Well, good evening. I'm glad you're all here. That was a very informative presentation, and I thank you for it, Frank. We are basically financial organizers, or as we call ourselves, financial stewards, for seniors, high net worth individuals, and divorcee and divorcees, both pre and post divorce. What we do basically is going into a home and we manage and coordinate the personal, legal, financial, and health insurance affairs in order for people to maintain the life they led before whatever circumstance changed to bring us on, whether it's senior, whether it's a memory issue, a physical issue, whether it's what we call gallivanting retirees who simply do not have time to manage their own affairs, or in younger cases, same thing, where they're too busy with their business life and their families to actually pay attention to their own personal financial lives. We'll come in and we will help put that in a systemized way, in an organized way, so that they and we together can maintain that life. We also
I'm sorry to interrupt you real quick. I have to say that I have a new goal in life, and that is to become a gallivanting retiree.
There you go.
I love that.
They really do exist, and you would be surprised how little they pay attention to their own lives.
I bet.
We also, a second portion is we're often called in to look at people's lives as they enter into seniordom, maybe younger, and are very confused by all the various planning entryways into that world, whether it be Medicare or it be the need for long-term care planning or any of that. We will consult with them, take a look at their finances, look at their assets, create budgets for them, create expense patterns for them, income patterns, and try to judge together with them how much they're going to need in the future to determine whether or not either to prepare financially to change their investment form to make that more possible, or, as in many cases, to get on the phone to Vincent Russo and Associates and get them an elder law attorney to make them Medicaid eligible. I just wanted to add to Frank's presentation that when you heard all that stories about all those documents and all those bank statements and all those receipts, that's usually when we get called in. We consider ourselves sleuths, and we will, in fact, find all those documents for the person in need. We very often work with the elder law attorney together while they're putting the application together. We're going around, running around, finding all the documents, forms, receipts, everything that would be needed to fulfill that obligation. Frank would send me a list of the expectations of what he needs to fill out the application. Each attorney is a little different, and then we would quick get through all of those and go back the full 5 years. As he said, community Medicare doesn't require that, but in many cases, the elder law attorney feels it's judicious to look ahead, especially when there are assets involved, not to lose the benefit of doing it early, even if at the time one is applying, one is only applying for community Medicaid. I will have to say that our prejudice when we founded this company almost 18 years ago was we committed ourselves to making sure that none of our clients ever went to a nursing home. And in 18 years so far, only 2 ever did out of the hundreds. And that means really understanding the ways of community Medicaid, working intimately with elder law attorneys to make sure that that doesn't happen, because we're of the firm belief that we can make sure that everything is available in a home so people can stay at home. The reason to not do that, perhaps, and to make use of assisted living facilities, independent living facilities, etc., prior to nursing homes, is usually one of social isolation. Clearly, if we get the feeling that our client, who may be living alone or maybe recently widowed or not, is really socially deprived and is not able to function and make use of the life that they do have, in which case we would recommend that they go to an assisted living facility or somewhere else, and we would help them appropriately do that as we find people to help them get assistance at home. So in that sense, before I go into the other, that was one of the real benefits we have for working with elder law attorneys we've been working with since we first got started 18 years ago. What I'm going to speak about a little bit is very allied to that concept, and that is the need to build a team, an elder care team of people. I will begin with a story, and this is an 82-year-old woman named Shirley. Shirley was a retired high school teacher with apparently a very good pension and Social Security, and had saved up reasonably well. But I didn't know any of that. When I was brought in by her neighbor and close friend, who had not heard from her in about 6 weeks, and suddenly, after looking at hospitals all across the city, found her in a nursing home. The story was like this. Apparently, she fell, broke a hip, couldn't reach anybody, was on the floor for about a day or two before the super finally came in and found her. She wound up in the hospital, then went from the hospital to a rehab facility, which was also a nursing home. And in the course of being in that nursing home, and here the stories are varied, so I will report her version. So it's a lot more complicated. But allegedly, an inpatient nurse pushed her in the nursing home. She fell down, broke a leg, and had to go back to the hospital. The next thing she knew, she was sent back from the hospital to this nursing home where she didn't want to go back, but she was sent there, and they decided on their own that they were going to apply for guardianship for her, take over all of her resources, and basically pay on a freelance basis. Then when they realized they couldn't do that, they applied for Medicaid, for which she was definitely not eligible at that time, and far less eligible than anybody ever knew. And her neighbor, in desperation, called us. We came in and basically found out she had nothing in place. She had no will. She had no powers of attorney. She had no healthcare proxies, and she was of a diminishing mental capacity, not incapable, but to manage her own affairs. She clearly no longer really knew what she had. Make a long story short, the first thing I did was bring in an elder law attorney to set up a will and powers of attorney and healthcare proxies for her. I then brought in what was then known as a geriatric care manager to manage her care and her life and her doctor's appointments and whatever, which is something that we don't do, deliberately not. and therefore to have a doctor ready when I could get her out of that nursing home. We did all that, and then the elder law attorney petitioned the court and said basically she doesn't need a guardian, and she didn't need a guardian. So we went through the whole court, not through the proceedings, just through the early examinations, and part of the recorder's request was that her apartment had to be straightened out. Why? Because she wasn't a hoarder, she was a book hoarder. Her apartment was immaculately clean, but there were, once we got done with it, there were 100 cases of books in a one-bedroom apartment. We had hired a professional organizer to go through that entire apartment and get rid of all of that. Now, getting rid of is not throwing away. It means you hire a professional who really knows what they're doing, and we had one on staff who would go in there and go through all the books, all the clothes, all the furniture, set everything up as to what was sellable, what was donatable, because she had a big heart for charity, particularly Jewish charities, and we needed to do that. Well, in the course of doing that, while we were waiting for the attorney to work with the court and with the nursing home to try to get her out of that, the nursing home had already taken all of her Social Security and made themselves the representative payee, also illegal. But I had to pull her out of all of that. But in order to do that, we had to get the apartment clean. So we did. And she went through every single book in the house. And to make a long story short, in the books were $17,000 in cash.
Oh my.
Which would never have been discovered by anybody. But even more remarkable, while this was all going on, and I did get her out, we made an agreement that we would pay them the remainder of what was owed the nursing home for the post-rehab world, and they would then let her go and sign an agreement of no harm, etc. And that we weren't going to sue their butts. And I got her out of there. But in that discovery of the books, there was also a small little receipt, and nobody could figure out what it was, including me. And then I realized maybe it was a receipt for a safety deposit box. But I'd already had a chance to go through her 12 banks at that time. She was clearly, and her parents were very depression area and immigrants. They were both Nazi Holocaust survivors. So they put their money in all kinds of banks all over the place, which she didn't even know anymore. So she was reasonably well off, better than we all thought anyway, making her far from Medicaid eligible. And then came the big one, that little receipt. I finally said, I became her POA because she had no one else, and we identified someone else as a secondary. And I took the safety deposit box, and I went to the one bank she used a lot, and I said, is this yours? They said, yes. So I said, as their POA, I want to open it. Sure. So we went and got a locksmith and opened up it. Long story short, there were $700,000 in United States savings bonds.
Oh.
For those of you who don't know, I could have walked out with the $700,000 in savings bonds, left and never to be heard from again because it's cash. It's totally untraceable cash. Needless to say, the first place I ran to was a bank, and I said, oh, guys, you got to do something with this. Open an account in her name. We got to put this in here. So this woman went from a pensioner with Social Security to a net worth of just over $1.4 million. And here she was in a nursing home being threatened with guardianship. And yet, through the elder law attorney and the geriatric care manager who got her a doctor, and then who got her a home health, 24-hour day care, which she private pays, so we didn't need Medicaid, and she could pay it and could pay it for quite a bit of years. And since she was in her mid-80s by the time all said was done, things are still going well. This is already five years ago. She's still doing much better. She's still living at home. But again, then we needed an accountant. She hadn't filed her taxes since 2012. So we had to go in and get all the records and work with the accountant. And together, that team, that entire team of people, put this woman's life at a point where her one request to me was, please don't impoverish me. And I said, you are very far from being impoverished. But it also let her get back in touch with uncles and cousins she hadn't seen in 30 or 40 years. And it was the professionalism of that team, the elder law attorney, the accountant, the financial advisor I brought in to deal with the $1.4 million, the geriatric care manager, the professional organizer, all of whom formed a network, which we as Eddie and Shine basically were the quarterback. We didn't hire them. We had the client hire them. So there was independent thought, but they came to us to manage the expertise, to put the team together. And that's basically what we do and what we think everyone should do in terms of working with seniors. So that's my short presentation about building a team, but you can see how it also works with an elder law attorney and the whole Medicaid issue, which is a big one and a very valuable asset. Elder law attorneys are our prime referral and our prime work source, because they manage to keep particularly seniors. But it's a funny world. We work with trust and estates attorneys a great deal, because it is astounding how few people are prepared to live their personal life, whereas they are extremely successful professionally. If anyone has any questions about any of that, Frank, you may be the only one who can see them. I'm not sure I can.
Well, yeah, I'm going to check. Thank you so much. And also, Gideon's contact information is there and has been there, obviously, too. So please call Gideon and email him if you've got any questions. That was great, Gideon. I was thinking, it's funny, when you said it right towards the end there, I had the exact, I'm a big football fan, and quarterback is what I was thinking. I mean, you guys, you coordinated all of that beautifully with Sally was her name, and bringing in, it's true for us too as elder law attorneys, specific, especially when you're an attorney who practices in a particular area. Because a lot of people think that because I'm an attorney, I know everything about every law there is. And the truth of the matter is, I know very little about other laws other than elder law. You get family members and friends that want to talk about, a personal injury or this or that, and they just assume because you're a lawyer, you know all that stuff. But I think it's very important to number one, is know your limits, and number two, also have a network of people, other professionals that you can get in touch with to help fill in those gaps. And I think that's your 3-point, Gideon, was that it's a team. It takes a team, and we have the same philosophy here with firms like Gideon's and accountants and financial planners. No one group or person can do all of that. I think it's great the way you tied that together. So really, really good. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so let's go. No questions at the moment, so we'll skip that slide. So just another slide or so, and then we can wrap it up. Maybe a couple of minutes. Oh, it's about 7:50, so we'll probably finish right around on time. So for us in the law firm, we talk about peace of mind and action plans, and it's pretty much a simple 2-step process. First is to retain the services of an experienced attorney who cares about you and your family. And the second is to either implement a plan to protect yourself or update your plan. We do meet with clients all the time who have existing wills or powers of attorney, even sometimes trusts. And it's a good idea. This area of law changes, the family situation changes, the finances change, health changes. This is not something that you should just do and put away. It's something that should be reviewed periodically, and that's what we help clients do, and make adjustments if need be. All right. So in terms of our law firm, obviously, we'd love to hear from you if you want to call for a meeting. You can visit our website. You see the information there. We have a great website. I also checked out Gideon's website before, but you mentioned, Gideon, that you're going to be changing it soon?
Well, I wouldn't worry about that. They can go on now. It's for a long time.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, no, I would definitely encourage them to go, but I more, they can look out for the changes as well.
And if you have questions also about Medicare, both in terms of enrollment and process, any health insurance issue that affects you, we do that. We'll do all the claims and find everyone's information and also defend their appeals process which we do for Medicaid. I'm also a specialist on any kind of fraud, particularly internet fraud, but also all kinds of other schemes and scams, particularly affecting seniors and others. So if you have any questions, just a question, just call me on that number and I'll answer the question. It doesn't mean you have to become a client.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, and we were talking before about the fraud thing, and that's unfortunately that's a pretty big thing, and probably more prevalent, and it's happening more than we'd like to think. I think out there, right?
One out of every 3 people over 65 will encounter it.
There you go. That's awful. It's an awful statistic, but it is what's happening, unfortunately. All right, so there is one. Let me just see. I think there's another question or so here. Oops, bear with me. Okay, so it looks, excuse me, it looks like it's for me, Gideon. What happens if my co-op, my residence co-op is a little over the maximum amount? It has to be exempt for Medicaid. So I guess if you're talking about the equity amount, that $840,000 number, if it's over the amount, then what you might have to do is sometimes we'll have clients, it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes the clients will take out like a line of credit or something and pull some of that equity out, and do something with it, put it into a trust or do something like that. All right. So hopefully that is helpful. And again, if you have any questions for either me or Gideon, please feel free to contact us after tonight. No problem. I had Gideon's slide up there for a while, but if anybody needs information, please contact us and we'll be happy to share with you his phone, his website, his email. And I want to thank everyone for participating tonight, in particular Gideon Shine. Thank you again, Gideon, for taking time out of your evening to help us tonight.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks again. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to info@vjrussolaw.com. We have some great seminars coming up, webinars coming up. All of that information is on our website, which you see there on the slide. And just as a reminder, if you would, please take a minute to fill out the survey that's going to pop up after the webinar is over. We appreciate the feedback. It's very helpful. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great night.